So you're up there. No heckling, please. First of all, a big thank you for coming along today to help us, the family, celebrate these people that were our parents, but clearly were your friends as well. Some of you worked with them. They had a wonderful long life, and what today we wanted to just celebrate some of the parts of their life. We're going to start rather early on, well before they were born. Because I think, to me at least, the mystery of how these two people from such different backgrounds came together, and therefore, gave us our childhood, if you like, is something that I've been uncovering in the research. So, the story begins with George, who was my great-grandfather, lived in Ireland in a very fine house called the Grange in Birr, Kings County. His third son was Harry de Courcy Bennett, born in 1878. Anthony? Wake up. This is Harry as a young man, and no doubt attending a lot of these rather fancy, this is a croquet party, I suspect. Well known for being a great wit and comedian, always playing the fool. So, dressing up, where are we? Harry moved to London, Anthony. And in 1984 became the youngest member of the stock exchange at that time. Very fancy hats, clearly obligatory in the early 1900s. In 1910, he met Gladys Cardwell. And it says here, a marriage has been arranged between Harry de Courcy, third son of Major George Lovett Bennett of Grange, Birr, Ireland, and Gladys Margaret, third daughter of Mr. T.H. Cardwell of Newton House, Dedbury, Gloucestershire. I think it was a good match, Anthony. This is the Cardwell house, so I think he did well. Next, Anthony. Marriage didn't discourage Harry from dressing up and having a good time. At the London Horse Show in 1913, Harry was spotted in cutting-edge clothes by Sport and General magazine. He'd become one of the well-dressed men in London, setting himself apart from the likes of the dowdy Earl of Orkney. As the writer says, with no clothes, can a man make himself look a caricature quite so effectively as with the morning coat? And goes on to describe in detail the do's and don'ts of male dressing. Tweed trousers, etc., and here's young Harry, black morning coat and white waistcoat and striped grey trousers, and rather loose chamois gloves. And you see on the right-hand end a rather dowdy Prince of Wales. So he was obviously cutting an edge in London at that time. They had a daughter, Noreen, in 1913. Then came the start of the Great War, and Harry joined the Hussars. Here's Harry on his horse. After the war, Harry returned to his stockbreaking job, but the war had taken its toll on his health. On July 20th, 1921, Gladys gave birth to Simon at 139 Sloane Street, London. Here he is. Must have got to be his sister's dolls. Next one, Anthony. Yes, you take over.
Okay. All right. Well, while Simon was being dressed up in white lace in London, up in Yorkshire, a romance was flourishing. Doris, a pianist and music teacher, had been charmed by the dashing gentleman on the right, our grandfather, who we never knew. But this is not a repeated romance of Harry meeting Gladys. Back in 1921, there were still many rules of engagement, and for reasons we will never know, they were not to marry. But these two love-struck youngsters did break one of the cardinal rules to the benefit of all of us in this room. The man's name, our grandfather, is unknown. Doris was in disgrace and gave birth to a baby girl on June 13, 1922. Her name was Hylda. It seems that Doris's family had a German friend who it's thought became this baby's benefactor, and this may be how she came about her German name. It means a woman of battle. If you knew her well, it's a fairly suitable name. She was adopted by Ethel and Joseph and lived in the coal mining village of Royston near Barnsley. The house was at the end of a terrace with an outside loo across the yard. It looked out over a field to coke ovens and a colliery. The air was thick and sweet with coal smoke. They had no children of their own, were strict, Christian, loving, and kind. Joseph was a coal miner and Ethel looked after Hylda. Discreetly but in tandem, Doris's connections enabled Hylda to have opportunities that a miner's daughter might not ordinarily have had. She attended a good school, had piano lessons, and got to play with a range of children from families outside her village.
Anyway, spot Hylda, I'll point her out. And young lass here.
Yeah, I inherited the mop. Thankfully. You know, when Mum got cancer, they gave her a wig to put on once she started losing her hair from the chemotherapy, and she never actually had to use it, and although she was losing loads of hair, she always had plenty to spare. Yes, what wonderful, what thick and wild hair she had. She got to visit Blackpool Beach and became a Girl Guide captain. She was studious and competitive. Simon, as a little boy, remembers being dressed up in a sailor outfit in the late afternoon by Nanny to be presented to his parents. This might suggest rather distant parents, but from the many photos, it's clear his father was very fond of his son. When taking the air with his father in Sloane Street, Harry would raise his stick and boldly walk out into the traffic, which was forced to give way. All right. Oh, wait. One more line. Summers were spent in a house on the Isle of Wight.
Good.
Early on, Simon became passionate about drawing and painting, a gift he inherited from his mother. Harry was in his late 40s when this photo was taken.
So these are Isle of Wight ones.
No, Isle of Wight. Isle of Wight.
This one?
That's the one.
Good. Sadly, Gladys rarely smiles in photos with the family. On June the 18th, 1928, Harry died of a heart condition at the age of 50. Simon was not quite 7. Simon's painting continued to develop. This painting is from 1929 when he was 8 years old. And his watercolours date from this watercolour dates from 1897 and was painted by his mother Gladys when she was in her teens. From what had been an idyllic childhood so far, Simon's fortunes had changed. He was sent to a prep school in Eastbourne, where the boys had to bathe in cold water every morning, and the headmaster's daughter, cuddling the cat in the photo, used to watch. The maths teacher immediately in front of Simon used to call him Sissy and rap his knuckles with a cane if he got a sum wrong. While he did not enjoy his prep school, his headmaster remarked at the end of his first term that he is a steady little worker who should do well. He was turned down for a place at Stowe, but the headmaster there had recommended he try Canford, which was a revelation, and Simon flourished there. He was secretary of the Natural History Society, an active artist, and academically successful. His housemaster, Tommy Nash, recognised Simon's diverse talents and warned him against becoming a butterfly. During his later teens, he would spend his school holidays youth hosteling, started folk dancing, and through these circles became a pacifist. His youth was also influenced by strong women. His sister, 8 years his senior, had attached herself to a group of young ladies who recognised society's inequalities and would go slumming.
Put that out.
This isn't the sister, this is the
No, that-
She's jumped ahead.
Yes.
So we've got a little bit of a gap in the first.
Okay. His mother never really recovered from Harry's death. She was convinced they had lost all their money. The family finances were managed moderately well by his Uncle Charlie, and whilst the Great Depression took its toll on investments, they continued to live fairly comfortably. It was also Charlie who would recommend to Simon to study architecture, which turned out to be a wise choice. He left Canford for the Bartlett Architectural School in London. Then the Second World War broke out.
Sorry. It wasn't following.
With the outbreak of war, Hylda decided not to study, but to help the war effort, a decision she often regretted later in life. She went on to a secretarial college, then worked at a local colliery for the first part of the war.
Later in the war, she became secretary at Benchbury High School. Benchbury Park School in Kent.
Back in
She made several friends there, including Liz Murray.
This is...
There you are. See, you should have brought her with you. You've probably never seen that picture.
Simon continued.
She made several friends there, including Liz Murray, who's in the picture. Simon continued his architectural studies and had been moved to Cambridge to avoid the Blitz. There he met Marie Rambert. Her ballet and modern dance company had moved out of London too, and he took dancing lessons at her school. In May 1941, he was called up for military service, but declared his conscientious objection to combat. And after several hearings and appeals, he was allocated to the National Fire Service that November. He spent much of the rest of the war in Reading and the home counties, and his ability to do architectural drawings was used to help meet the demand for more fire station buildings. We wonder if this fire service cabaret evening sowed the seeds of his acting career.
right here.
I haven't seen any.
What a surprise.
He sketched this view of Windsor, which I have on my boat in Seattle, only to be accosted by the military police who accused him of having military objectives. What he told me was, he was sitting there in the pouring rain with the sound of bombs falling around, and this detective or constable or something came up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Oi, oi, oi, what are you doing looking at the Queen's house?" So I just trying to paint a picture. Finally, he gained leave of the fire service to return to his architectural studies in 1946.
When the war ended, Hylda headed for London and got a job as secretary to Canterbury Hall, the lodgings for dons and students of the LSE. Irmgard Kleineberger began lecturing at the LSE, and Hylda organised her accommodation. She was a German-Jewish refugee, and they became close friends, exploring all the cultural riches of London together. Irmgard had a cousin at the German prisoner of war camp in Wales, so they visited him and met a Dr. Spitzer, an art professor there. With the war over, the POWs were granted short periods of leave from the camp and were still in Britain because they originated from Eastern Germany, now occupied by the Soviets. The professor had promised to contact them when he came to London to lecture, but instead a young artist, Herbert Kleetz, came in his place and made contact with Irmgard on arrival. Irmgard fell for Herbert, though it seems that Hylda was also smitten. In 1947, Herbert returned to West Germany, and Irmgard followed him. Hylda promised she would visit as soon as she could, and in 1948, Irmgard heard of an international youth camp near Hanover, where she was living, and suggested this to Hylda. Simon's friends after the war were mainly fellow COs. His friend Gabriel Seal told him of an international youth camp in Germany, and in July 1948, Simon is seen aboard a train in The Hague. I'm lost.
Destined for Hanover.
Destined for Hanover. I'm really lost.
The camp worked to help clear derelict sites damaged from the war, but memories also included endless potato peeling sessions. Nonetheless, the camp was a success. In the photo here, we can only guess that the large wooden paddle might be to stir a vat of boiling potatoes.
We wonder if this is the moment that Simon spotted the girl in the striped shirt. It's very strange. I have a love for these stripes. It seems that her skirt was in need of repair, but perhaps this incident broke the ice. These two smiling youngsters had finally met. This was July 1948, and on December the 21st, 1948, they were married. Simon qualified as an architect and looked for work and was taken on by Paul Mauger, a Quaker, pacifist and notable architect at his practice in Old Welland. Hylda and Simon moved to a cottage in Datchworth.
Okay, that's fine.
His early colleagues included Paul Mauger, George Mathers, Simon and David Sutcliffe.
David is here.
And George is here.
George is here.
Hello, George.
On January the 50th, 1950, Hylda gave birth to Jane.
January 50th.
January 5th, 1950. Simon's keen interest in birdwatching extended to Trafalgar Square. It seems the young Jane does not yet share this passion. In 1952, the family was complete with a boy, Patrick, that's me, who arrived in March. He was a strapping lad, 10 pounds of birth, and Jane looks keen to assert herself over this young bruiser. Joseph and Ethel, Nana and Grandad to us, were regular visitors. Perhaps the background is the building site of Singler's. I believe it is. Yeah. Family holidays were in the bracing air of the East Coast to toughen up the youngsters. Don't you just love those wood, knitted babies?
Had them too.
6 years in 1958, an unplanned addition to the family arrived. Simon built Singler's in an orchard, come garden, overrun with nettles.
Sorry, we'll come back to these, but that's fine. Actually, this is like it's George. That's
Simon and George.
Simon.
That's David.
David's here.
I think that's David.
Back line.
Yeah.
On the left is the sculptor.
Paul Mauger.
That's Paul Mauger.
And that's
Paul
George.
Mauger and George.
Who's this chap?
Mitchell. John Mitchell.
That looks like Simon's hair.
Yes.
6 years later, in 1948, an unplanned addition to the family arrived. Simon had built Singler's in an orchard cum kitchen garden overrun with nettles. The Singler's years epitomized an idyllic family life on summer days. Simon built the house and Hylda was the architect of the garden. They don't mention your birth now.
Well, sort of. I'm the unplanned addition, sorry.
The director was George Davis.
Working tirelessly to shape beautiful borders and a large vegetable garden, including 2 asparagus beds and a
Yes.
large fruit case. Actually, the asparagus beds were, because that was the kitchen garden for the Petty's house. And the asparagus were already established. That's why we had such fabulous asparagus.
Because I helped create that. I remember that very well. You had to dig very deep and it was a big job. You had these asparagus plants and the bread wasn't ready. We spent a day and a half preparing this. And we were told that in prison, prisoners would only dig an asparagus bed if they knew they were going to be in prison for at least 5 years.
Bordered by a river, trees with ropes to swing from, and a quiet lane leading into the Hertfordshire countryside, it was a great place to be a child. Across the river, the neighbouring Gessens was an evangelical commune led by charismatic Ian Tate,
Yes.
I'm not saying in this way.
whose children
I'm not
became good
saying
friends of ours. In 1961, at Datchworth Fete, a theatre producer, Sheila Graham, who lived in the village, brought together a group of musicians, dancers and actors to perform English folk dance and Elizabethan jigs, short plays. Within a short time, a formal group called the Elizabethans had been formed, combining talented musicians and singers of early music with theatre and dance from the Elizabethan period. As children, the jigs, they were called, were part of our life. Simon going to rehearsals, us going to performances. They performed at many church fetes and halls across the southeast. After a few years, the medieval morality verses of Rex Vivus were translated by Sheila Graham into a play that became The King of Life. It was performed in many of Britain's great cathedrals.
No, it doesn't matter.
Well,
Yeah.
Simon here and Daphne Hanson, who was going to come. She broke her ankle this week.
Oh, no. Simon was the king of life, and we can see him here with Mirth, his faithful messenger, played by John McCluskey and Daphne Hanson, as his wise queen. This wonderful group carried on for nearly 30 years. Family holidays. Simon and Hylda were both keen bird watchers. It never occurred to us that destinations had a bird-watching motive. We camped all the time and in all weathers.
Charles, I think this might be landed.
Kids.
It is landed.
I was a bit too young to
That
know.
switch over to the anchorage, where you can get onto those.
Yeah, we spent many chilly, damp hours being told to watch out for various birds, which I can't remember the names of. Anyway, eventually, as cars became more reliable, we ventured into France and as far as Croatia in 1965, when it was still Yugoslavia. And we discovered the pleasures of hot holidays in the sun. The long car journeys were punctuated by frequent emergency stops to look at large birds sitting on the Hylda cooked the meals on 2 camping stoves under a gas lamp, and when Simon had finished digging rain trenches around the tents, he would disappear with his sketch pad. Even on the long journeys down and back, we rarely ate in restaurants or stayed in hotels. Yet Hylda managed to cook tasty, freshly cooked food for the 5 of us, night after night, come wind or rain.
This is nearly 50 years ago. This is around the time when many of you in this room will have got to know Hylda and Simon well. The photos are all but finished, but the story does not. From working with Paul Mauger, Simon worked for a few years with the Stevenage Development Corporation for Sint, before joining Martin Priestman Partners in Hitchin. The practice flourished, moved into a beautifully restored mill house in Hitchin, and became Priestman Williams Bennett, and to my memory had around 10 architects and designers, including Jane Priestman at its peak.
Is that about right, James?
That's right.
About roughly 10 architects, you were there under.
And 2 offices, 3 offices.
Well, it's spread over that wonderful building.
I never knew that.
Oh, you never knew that?
Never knew that, no. I thought there were just the 2 of them.
They were. The final stage was just Martin and Simon when the practice wound down. They got close to retirement.
Yeah.
But Michael Phillips was,
Martin
Phillips.
Michael Williams.
No,
Michael Williams.
Michael Williams was involved.
He left first, and then Martin and Simon carried on.
The decline of the post-war building boom conveniently coincided with the maturing of their careers, and Simon finally retired when he was 67. Much of his work had been schools. Perhaps as architectural work in England began to diminish, he embarked on projects with UNESCO in Ivory Coast and Guyana to help improve the design of schools there. In his retirement, he tirelessly worked to help fund and then restore the windmill at Cromer.
Yes.
On our Sunday visits, when he was in his 80s, we had to make sure he wasn't doing tours at the mill before we set off. And every day, without fail, he would don his gumboots and binoculars and slip away for an hour up Dirty Lane, which led off into the countryside around Walton. Bird watching for Simon wasn't the thrill of ticking off another rarity. I never recall him keeping a list of birds, but he knew his lesser white-throats from white-throats, black-caps and garden warblers, not by their dull brown plumage, but by their song, all beautifully and subtly different. He had the excitement of living to see buzzards and red kites return to the skies of Hertfordshire. You want to take over?
So I do this last one.
Yeah.
Right, good.
Yeah.
As children, coming home from school, there were bread tins on the Arga, the smell of dough rising or bread baking in the oven. There were puddings after dinner on most days, apple pies, crumbles, rhubarb, gooseberry fools and cakes. In the summer, you could hear Hylda shouting at the blackbirds, pigeons or rabbits that were constantly trying to eat the vegetables and fruit she was growing for us. Doing our homework, we could hear her singing in the kitchen as she worked. My father would grumble about the clanking of dishes as he listened to the radio after work next door. In the autumn, being picked up from school, we would be taking blackberry picking on the way home, knowing there would be crumble for dinner. And last thing at night, from our bedrooms, we would hear the back door open and Hylda call out at the top of her voice for the dog, Hank or Harley, no doubt audible half a mile away. If we were to unwittingly exhibit signs of village talk creeping into our accents, we were brought up very sharply. As a very young child in the 60s, I was witness to the collision of traditional values and the new age of liberation as my elder brother and sister asserted themselves in ways that Hylda could not understand. Jimi Hendrix was anathema, The Who's My Generation was banned from being played. Hylda was competitive, notably as a driver, in complete contrast to our father. She never had an accident in her life. She loved to travel and to make friends, especially abroad. Taking her daughter Jane shopping on Oxford Street, she would be half a block in front and calling back, "Come on, Jane, what's the matter? Are you anemic?" We should all be so lucky to have the kind of energy she had as a young and older woman. Her passion for the garden was relentless. The beds of flowers, roses, shrubs, the tomatoes in the greenhouse, the fruit cages, all the vegetables, and her obsession with weeds. Some of you will know Hylda and Simon from the French group, which they attended for many years. Others will know Hylda from bridge playing, but this was not a game for Simon. 32 years ago, Hylda was diagnosed with cancer. She was 58, but it didn't take away her energy, nor that much of her mobility. And then they discovered that she was celiac, changing her diet for the remainder of her life, and for many years facing the scarcity of palatable gluten-free food.
I'd like to add something there. Growing up in a fairly poor family, it was a coal mining family, they had to eat bread with everything. One of her favorite foods was bananas, and when she had a banana, she said she always ate bread with it. This was to fill up because they didn't have money for a lot of good protein. And so becoming a celiac was actually one of the worst things that ever happened to her because she no longer could eat one of her favorite foods and the food that she'd eaten so much, which was maybe why she did become a celiac. She'd become allergic to the gluten. Unfortunately, she stopped baking, and so we no longer had those lovely pies and cakes and fresh baked bread around the house.
We're nearly there. Not so long ago, I remember her gardening in Walken, perhaps well after the onset of Alzheimer's, bending with double with knees straight to pluck out another weed. She could just bend down, pluck them out, without even using her stick. And that brings us to the part of Mum's life that we would wish to forget, when we began to lose the mother we knew, and she began to lose us. But her vivacity and energy for so much of her long life will be what we remember most fondly. Simon was a man of commitment and never shirked his duties, though he was shocking at washing up. Whatever happened, he was always there for us. His love for Hylda, his children and grandchildren was unconditional. Even in his old age, he would never pause to get involved and help out when family members were in distress. We remember him for his kindness, his magnanimity, his humour and charm that entertained us at family meals, his energy and his tolerance. He was not without any prejudice, yet was able to change his mind, such as when the social changes of the 60s and 70s were presented to him through his children. I got off quite lightly because Patrick and Jane had broken all the rules. Thank you. Hylda and Simon were very different in temperament, yet her competitive energy and his tolerance blended fairly smoothly. Throughout our mother's many health issues in the past 30 years, Simon was always there at her side. In his last 5 years, he had to learn to cook, to shop for groceries, and increasingly to look after Hylda day and night as her health faded. It was only in April last year but he agreed to have full-time help in the house. His integrity was unwavering throughout his life. He shines out as an example to all his family. In this competitive age of the self, the materialism, the worship of popular culture, Simon reminds us of the power of simple but essential values, that living your life by these is not an impediment to a long, loving and fulfilling life. Last word, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. That's very nicely
This is
written.
Hilda's 90th birthday. Some of you will remember it. This was the assembled family members. Thank you for putting up with that. I think we have some food coming, do we?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.